For the first time in this app, we're creating some of our own resource files. Now, you'll recall from previous apps that there's a strings.xml resource file where you're supposed to define the various string literals used throughout your app. And of course, that's located in the res folder under values, and you can see it here. But you can also see that we have two other resource files which we explicitly created. One called colors.xml, which is where you typically will define reusable colors. And one of the benefits of defining colors in an XML file like this is that it makes it very easy to change those colors throughout your app rather than having to go edit all the code directly. So if you define all of your colors as values in the colors.xml file, then if you wish to change a given color, you can modify the corresponding resource in the colors.xml file and it will be applied wherever that color was used throughout the app. Similarly, you can define dimensions in the dimen.xml file. And again, this actually gives you a couple of benefits. One is the ability to change dimensions easily, but more specifically, when you're working in source code, in Java code, you can't specify density independent pixels, but in XML you can. So if you define your dimensions in XML, you can take advantage of density independent pixels. So let's talk about how we created these XML files and look at their contents as well. So to create an XML file that represents values, what you would typically do is right-click the values folder and select New and then Other. Now, if you've already created an Android XML file previously, it may show up here as it is on my screen, but let's assume that you haven't and therefore it's not showing up here. So we'll select Other, and you can see under Android we have the ability to create an Android XML file. Then we can click Next, and at this point you would specify the XML file name. So when I was creating the one for the file called colors.xml, I typed colors.xml here. I made sure that values was selected, and that is the default if you right-click values in the res folder when you say to add the new file. Notice it's also saying that it's going to go into the /res/values folder, and then you can hit finish, at which point it will create that file for you. Now, when you open that file, this is what it looks like in resource editing view, and if I click the colors.xml tab at the bottom here, this is what it looks like in XML view. Now, if you're comfortable working with XML, you can go into the resources element and create your own color element with a name and the value inside the starting and ending tags. In this case, we have the name light orange. If you want to name your colors in a more generic manner so that they represent perhaps what that color gets applied to, that's a good way of naming them. In our case, we were just demonstrating the basic capability of creating a color in a resource file. And of course, if we change it from this hexadecimal value that represents light orange, then the name in this case may not be the appropriate one for being more generic in our naming. Now, going back over to the Resources tab here, if you wanted to add a color using this tab, you just hit the Add button. Make sure that color is selected, and I'll just create a temporary one here. So, whoops. Let's try that one more time. Click Add, select Color, and click OK first. Then it creates a new entry, at which point you can name it, and you can give it a hexadecimal value. So let's just say I wanted black, so I could do 0000, and if I then say save by typing either Control S or by using the save command up here, now I can go over to the XML file representation and you can see the new color that we just created. Now, when you're defining your colors, you use either RGB or alpha RGB, ARGB format. And in the case that you're using RGB, the hex number must be either 3 or 6 digits if each pair of digits in a 6-digit number is identical. So if you had, for example, 00FF00, that's the same as the 3-digit number 0F0. So basically the 3-digit version is a shorthand for a 6-digit version of a hex number where each individual pair has the same digit in both positions. If you're using alpha, which allows you to specify transparency, then you have to have either a 4-digit or an 8-digit hexadecimal number. And again, the first pair represents alpha, the next pair represents red, then green, then blue, and in each individual pair, if the 2 digits are identical, then you can use the shorthand 4-digit version. Now in this app we don't need this temp color, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that and resave my file. So that's how I created the colors.xml file, and we'll see where we use that color momentarily in another video. For the dimensions XML file, you can see that I have two dimensions here, tag button width and edit button width, and these represent the width in density independent pixels for those two buttons that represent each search that's displayed in the app. So if I go back over here, we have our tag button and our edit button, and we're just defining the widths of these two buttons. Those are the basically minimum widths for these two buttons. They can be scaled if we were to rotate the app. So for example, if I type Control F11 here, it'll rotate the AVD, and you can see that the buttons resize when the AVD is rotated. So now, of course, the tag button is much wider and the edit button is much wider. And you'll notice, by the way, all of our controls have been scaled to fit this new width when I rotate the device, quote unquote, in this case the AVD. So we're going to specify those here, and by defining dimension resources, dimen resources, we once again can take advantage of density independent pixels, DP or DIP, and this also gives us the ability to change these dimensions easily without having to go modify the source code of the app. And once again, to create this, what I did was go to the File menu. Sorry, I right-clicked, the values node in my res folder. Then I selected New and Android XML file if it was displayed here, or Other if it was not. I selected that I wanted to create an Android XML file. Hit Next. Dimen.xml is the name by convention that you use for files that contain dimensions. It is a values file. It's going to be placed in the res values folder. Once I hit finish, it created that file for me. And when I brought it up on the screen initially, it showed up in this format. And once again, you can add a new item to it by hitting the add button, making sure that you select the appropriate type of resource that you're creating. Because it's the file named dimen.xml, it automatically selects dimension by default, just as colors.xml automatically selected color by default, and just as strings.xml, when I hit add, is automatically going to select string by default. So as you can see here, it is capable of recognizing, based on the names of the files, which are conventions that are provided in the documentation for Android, what type of resource it is that you intend to create. So going back to my dimensions file again, you can see the two different dimensions, and once again we have the 230 and 50 as the widths in density independent pixels of those two buttons. The heights of them are being determined by wrapping the content inside the buttons, and the content, of course, is the labels that you see on those buttons. Now for the strings.xml, what we did is created strings that represent all the different messages we have throughout our app. And if I go to the XML representation of this file, you can see the name of each of the different string resources and the corresponding values of those string resources as well. And one of the resources you can see here is the search string for accessing Twitter search, and we use this search URL resource and append to it the query that we specify, and then take that URL and hand it off to the browser on the device to show the Twitter searches.